We've got four, not just experts, but they are truly masters at this grape. And I'll introduce them in a second. But one funny little story is we were promoting this seminar in my newsletter yesterday. And the headline was find out why Sideways take, the movie Sideways, obviously, why their take on Merlot was fake news. And I got a bunch of nice and funny responses. And then someone who I did not realize was subscribed to the newsletter, Alexander Payne, the 7-time Oscar-nominated director of Sideways, I guess, was subscribed, and he replied, "Easy, Tiger." So he was defending Merlot's portrayal, which was more complicated than I'm suggesting. And for the few of you who haven't seen the movie, of course, it created kind of a pop culture meltdown of this noble grape. But perhaps when we can talk about it with our guests, perhaps that was a net good overall, or eventually, because it got rid of the imposters. But for me, I think of Merlot a little bit like the Van Gogh. Excellent Merlot. Our guests, our panelists are kind of the champions or the creators of excellent Merlot. I think of excellent Merlot a bit like Van Gogh in that it's really easy to like. And sometimes the cognoscenti, the experts or the hipster somms are only looking for like bizarre tastes, those bizarre artists, the Picassos, although Picasso gained a lot of great fame, but more of the cubist renderings, when sometimes we just want great beauty. And I find that in all four of these wines tonight. I opened them a little bit earlier, and I'm in love. So let me introduce our guests, and how we're going to structure this is we're going to go through each of their wines, and then we're going to have a perhaps a trivia power round at the end. And there'll be plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions. Do it in the Q&A. Are you, by the way, Kim, are you still muted, or is it just make sure you can hear? I think I would have heard from other people if you're still muted. Hopefully you're not, but Q&A me or Q&A us if you are muted. Okay, so the four illustrious people we have. First, we have Steve. And by the way, let me just show you directionally how we're going tonight. And that is, I'm going to show you a little map we made. And this is, so we're starting with, let me move that a little bit. So we're going, tonight, it's a northern journey. So we're going from Paso Robles to the Santa Lucia Highlands, specifically Arroyo Seco. And then we're going to the Carneros area of Napa, so way up here, and then the Rutherford area of Napa. Carneros, of course, Sonoma shares some of that too, but I believe it's the Napa side. Anyway, so down in Paso Robles, you've got Steve Peck, a native Californian. Uncle was a winemaker, studied enology and chemical engineering at the august UC Davis. First went into biotech, did gigs all over the place while he was still in school at Joseph Phelps, was a while at Jekyll, landed at J.Lohrs, and now runs everything for J.Lohrs and its labels. He won the Winemaker of the Year by the San Luis Obispo County Wine Industry, and he's featured in a book on the winemakers of beautiful Paso Robles. So thank you, Steve, for being here. Welcome.
Thanks for the warm welcome, Mark. I guess you got most of that right. Although at J.Lohr, there's only one guy running everything at J.Lohr, and I think you know who I'm talking about, Jerry Lohr himself. But,
Okay. I didn't realize he was still running it. That's really cool.
Yeah, founder-led company. That's just a great place to work.
Well, this is really a kind of a warm evening for me because two of you represent wineries that symbolize my start in wine, which was starting a campus club at Stanford. And I brought Jerry Lohr in, or he was gracious enough to come 30 years ago, leading an amazing tasting for Stanford students. And then Grgich Hills, and we're going to get, that's our number 3 wine, Austin Hills, co-founder, came into Stanford Wine Circle too. So it's like what comes around goes around, and it's a great homecoming. So next up, going south to north in the Santa Luisa Highlands, Santa Luisa is Lucia. Sorry, my wires crossed. I'm so used to going like from Spanish or European wine to, it's like Paso Robles or Paso Robles. It's this tomato thing. But anyway, so Steve is one of the great experts in viticulture and winemaking. Really interested to see you run Monterey Pacific, which works with a slew, a consultant and a grower and an advisor to amazing wineries from Hahn to Ventana to Morgan to Bermudas. And then, of course, I believe your first planting of your own winery, McIntyre, happened in '87. And one stat that just blows me away is you've planted 20% of all the grapes in the Santa Luisa Highlands. So that, and would you say that's considered, and first of all, welcome, but is that the best AVA or appellation of Monterey County, would you say?
Well, it might be, I think, and thank you, Mark, for having me. It is certainly for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And I think there are other areas within the county that might grow different varietals that you could say would be the best for that varietal, but it's still in the formative years, if you would. We're still young.
But you're prolific there. So any questions people have about that AVA or anywhere near there or winemaking in general, you're the man. And then we have Ivo and MS from University of Zagreb, which is really cool. I love Croatian wine. And of course, you run everything for Grgich Hills. Your uncle was Mike Grgich, the partner of Austin Hills, who came into the Stanford Wine Circle. And you worked your way up at Grgich Hills. You've been there 3 decades. And I've also was interested to see that you're a proponent and a pioneer of natural farming. So Ivo, welcome. Great to see you.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here with these distinguished guests. Also, correction, you said that Mike was Ivo's uncle. My uncle Mike is 99, turning 100, very much alive and kicking. So he's not giving up yet.
I love it. Must be all that wine.
Every day he still drinks glass every day. Mostly he's a Zinfandel.
Well, it's inspiration for all of us. And then finally, a batting cleanup in our most northerly location, not too northerly compared to Grgich, is Michael Scholz, VP of Winemaking and Vineyards at St. Supery, 6th generation winemaker. I love Australia. My wife is Australian. I love the Barossa. So that's where Michael's from, the beautiful, famous Barossa County or valley, I should say. But you graduated from, or you have a BS in enology from what is now the University of Adelaide. And you first arrived at St. Supery back in the tender years of 1996. And once again, you are in charge. So it's wonderful to have you, Michael. And I was excited to hear or read that you're also an Australian swimming and equestrian champion. So that's pretty cool. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having us and to be joining this great panel. It's fabulous. So I appreciate that. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Well, good on you. And let's not waste any time. For those of you who have one or all four of the wines or your own Merlot, let's jump into the J.Lohrs. Let's go back to Steve. And I'll call up a map, but I'm just going to show, and I say Steve, there are two Steves, obviously Steve Peck. And here we go, the J.Lohrs Merlot from Paso Robles. Am I pronouncing it right? It's the Los Osos.
We say Los Osos.
Los Osos. Okay,
course,
glad I asked.
In Spanish would translate to the bears, but in our case, we're referring to the soil series, Los Osos, which is a relatively high clay soil found in the Paso Robles area. And, might find a few exceptions to this, but, it seems like in California, the trend is, if you've got, a hillside with thin soils, you might want to plant Cabernet there. If you've got a little lower elevation site with deeper soils, in this case, Los Osos soil, it can be quite suitable for Merlot. And that's the case with our ranch here it's actually in Templeton, California is where the Vineyards planted.
Okay.
And it's if you understand the Paso Robles appellation, we have a cool air inlet that follows the Highway 46 that gets you over from the coast to our elevated valley that is known as Paso Robles. And of course, as that cold air rushes in from the Pacific, you kind of create this similar to the way they describe Monterey, where you have this kind of thermal rainbow. So the closer you are to that font of ocean breeze, there's actually some decent Pinot Noir that's grown in the westernmost part of Paso Robles. And then it gets a tad warmer and you're finding some great Grenache and Syrah. And then the next notch warmer would be what I would call Merlot country. And so then as you get further into the valley, again, this kind of radiates out in a fan shape. You start to get better, more suitable for Cabernet. And it's true that if you try to move Cabernet too close to that cold water source, you'll get to a point where you just flat out won't ripen. Even though I think of Paso Robles as a warmer area overall,
right?
Proximity to the ocean really does create a great range of temperature climates to ripen a wide variety of varieties.
How close is this vineyard to the ocean? Is it kind of Western Paso or? It's
22 miles. It's called the El Pomar AVA, which would be right about under where that P is that says Paso Robles. I believe that's the El Pomar district.
Okay.
There. And it is, we get some of the lowest temperatures. It's one of the earlier places to frost, for example. As in the fall, and it's a place where the rainfall is a little bit higher than the rest of the county, where we'll see some Spanish moss in the oak trees, and again we'll have these undulating hillsides that has the typical limestone on the ridges. But again, the heavier clay soils in the valleys where we've developed this 130 acres, in fact, of Italian clone Merlot that we stumbled on back in the early 2000s.
And by the way, I invite any of the other winemakers to join in and make comments or even ask questions. But as someone who doesn't know that much about viticulture, is clay considered the best soil for Merlot?
Well, I see some nodding up and down. It generally thought to be, maybe higher water holding capacity, and clay can be part of that. And, you have sand silt clay, so clay holds water, but it doesn't give water up as easily. But I would just say higher water holding capacity soils tend to be a feature that people developing vineyards are looking for when they're planting Merlot.
Okay. Makes sense. Well, do you want to get into the wine and take it apart a little bit? Tell us about, how this varies from your other bottlings, and please take us through this, and teach us about what we should look for in a good Merlot.
Absolutely, Mark. So it starts. The foundation is the estate vineyards. When I started with J.Lohrs back in 2007, our sales team would typically pour our Pinot Noir and then the Syrah, the Cabernet, and they would save the Merlot for last because it was the burliest, most astringent Merlot on the planet. I kind of took it on myself. I didn't really necessarily disclose to many what I thought of that situation, but I kind of wanted to reverse that. I wanted our Cabernet to be more extracted, our Merlot to be a little bit softer, a little bit more aromatic. And so a couple things I did is for one, I took the crusher rollers out. So we still destem the fruit, but we get as much whole berry as possible into the fermenter, and that gives the ferment what the French will use the term amylic character. So
Millet. M-I-L-L-E-T?
M-A-M-I-L-Y-C, and amylic. And you think of like a candied fruit, like did you ever have those Jolly Rancher candies when you were a kid?
Of course.
Like, yeah, that sort of artificial high tone fruit. And you'll get that from whole berry fermentation. It's almost halfway to, say, carbonic maceration when you ferment that way rather than popping the berries open. So that was the first thing. And then every bit of Malbec I could get my hands on. So for over 10 years now, our Los Osos Merlot has had anywhere from 10 to 15% Malbec. And with a new planting of Cabernet Franc, that we established just a couple years ago. This vintage you're tasting here, the 2020, is our first release. I don't know the exact percentages, but it's about 5% Cab Franc in the blend, and it really lifts that sort of bright, high tone. Almost, when I was at Phelps, Craig Williams used to talk about minty, getting the mintiness just right, and so, so I think maintaining that freshness, particularly in a warmer vintage, has been really important to us. So and of course, everything you're going to find at J.Lohrs, even our under $20 stuff, it spends a full year in barrels in our barrel rooms. We tend to select relatively light toasted barrels for our Merlot program, again, to just showcase that bright red fruit of Merlot.
It's really pretty, and it's not oaky, but I do get like a little bit of sweet spice. Would you agree with that?
Some baking spices. We make sure that we might do some hybrid barrels, for example, so we get some French heads in there with this price point. We can't afford to do all French oak, but we can do French heads to get that little bit of coconut, or to me, it reminds me of surf wax, that kind of coconut, lactic kind of fresh aroma. And those are all attributes that are very intentional in the J.Lohrs Merlot.
Are you a surfer? How do you know what surf wax smells like?
I'm a fair weather surfer. When I lived in Santa Cruz, I always lived in fear of ending up on the 6 o'clock news as that guy, that got washed out to sea.
That's
yeah,
really cool.
that's one of the advantages of living on the coast. Living in San Luis Obispo County is the access to the beaches here.
Good old slow town. I know our fellow winemakers all have these wines. Do people have any comments, or I'll also check the Q&A, but please feel free to comment or ask questions of Steve. Does anyone? Would you say it's medium or medium to full bodied or full bodied? I find it's kind of somewhere in between. Like when I first laid my lips on it, I'm like, that's nice. It's not a big extracted red wine. It still has some finesse to it.
Yeah. Our house style, going back 15 years here at the winery, working on our red programs, we kind of coined a phrase called dense but soft. And so if you really break that down and deconstruct that, we're talking about, we try to produce wines that are high in color.
Okay.
And so, that means, letting the fruit hang to where the color is pretty easily extracted, like hang in the vineyard. It also means really hot fermentation to tease out all that color early. But it turns out that the tannins, that dense but soft, meaning that, lower tannin means generally, not leaving the skins on that alcoholic, that later stages of fermentation where there's a lot of alcohol present, that it extracts a lot of the astringent tannins. And so that's really been our house style. I think it's evident in this, and maybe explains your little bit of perplexity of, wow, this wine, is it dense? Yeah, I think it is, but it doesn't give you that punch in the face that full bodied. So there's sort of, I kind of think of it, there's two aspects to kind of what you're trying to describe when you describe that body. There's that attack, that entry that kind of correlates, in my opinion, most with the color of the wine. But then there's that 5, 10, 20 seconds later, there's that second dimension, which is the tannin astringency. So we're ramped up on the front end, but we're really intentionally modest on the back end.
Like that. Well put. Any other comments on this wine? I was going to ask, so what does Malbec, and I guess it's still somewhat of a rarity in California, but what does Malbec offer? You might have mentioned it, but I'm a simple-minded guy. I need it really laid out for me. What does Malbec offer to the blend that Merlot can't provide itself?
Well, structurally, I would say it's one step further in that house style, that, structurally meaning high in color, but soft in tannin. So
Okay.
I think that's a foundation. It also, the youthful Malbecs, when the wines are young, they smell exactly like hibiscus tea, or even, when I was a kid, the standard for hibiscus was Hawaiian punch. So that's, so you kind of, and even today, if you go to Starbucks, they sell this great hibiscus tea that really has this beautiful floral aroma. So it is kind of more that high tone red fruit, but somewhat in the floral direction, at least in this growing region.
And then what does the Cabernet Franc, the 10%, give you?
Again, more that classic herbal mintiness, juniper berry.
Yeah.
So we all look for euphemisms to describe the varietal character of that herbaceous character of Cabernet and Merlot without saying the word veggie or green, but it's kind of, head in that direction. Maybe conifer would be a nice term to describe.
I like that. Excellent. All right. Well, we will, and I love having the four together so we can kind of have a comparative tasting and kind of smell one against the other. The nuances really pop for me that way. But let's go over to Steve McIntyre, the other Steve. And I'll just kind of I'll go back to our map of the Central Coast. And so we're leaving Paso Robles for the moment, Slow Town, San Luis Obispo, and we're going up to Monterey County, and we're going up to, let me get the other map, Santa Lucia. I can't say that. Santa Lucia Highlands, and home of a great racetrack, the Arroyo Seco region. Here's your, so we're locating it there. And then this is closer up, this region, quite far inland. But Steve, tell us about this. Make sure Steve's still with us. Let's see. Where is Steve? So Steve,
I'm here now. Thank you.
Okay, okay, beautiful.
So, yeah, thank you, Mark. So, one way to remember Santa Lucia versus Santa Lucia is the Italians would say Santa Lucia, and of course the Spanish would say Lucia. So, since it was founded by the Spaniards, we say it as Santa Lucia. So, yeah, you're holding up our Merlot, McIntyre Merlot. That happens to be from the Arroyo Seco appellation, which is just south and abuts the Santa Lucia Highlands appellation. It's going to be warmer than the Santa Lucia Highlands. Okay. And I cut my teeth in winemaking at Hahn Smith & Hook back in 1982, 83, 84, before I went back out into the vineyards. And at that time, you know, there was a lot of Cabernet Merlot, Cabernet Franc in the Highlands. And of course, today you don't, I think there's a couple of vines up at Hahn just for the heck of it. But it was very difficult to make those Bordeaux varietals at that time in the 80s and do it consistently without having the wines being accused of growing next to a pepper field or an asparagus field. We just had a lot of issues with pyrazines, in particular ones that tasted like bell pepper. So it was a tough go, tough go for a while. And that's why I have a chip on my shoulder, having worked up there as a winemaker and hoping that we could make world-class wines, but struggling to do so. I felt even after we converted the entire ranch to Pinot Noir Chardonnay and the Highlands to the same, that there'd be some place in Monterey County that I could grow decent Merlot. And it took me a while to figure it out. We don't use a lot of water. It's a very low crop level. And it's out of the wind because the wind is such a critical component of our grape growing region that cools things down a little sooner than you would like for a Bordeaux varietal. And that's how we're able to get Merlot ripe year in and year out for this product.
So can you take this apart for us? Can we taste this and you tell us what you get in it?
Yeah, sure. It's 100% Merlot. So we do make some wine with as a Merlot base and Malbec and Petit Verdot as blenders, as small percentages of the wine. But this wine is 100%. It has been 100% Merlot since we started doing it. Wow. The vineyard's actually Kimberley Vineyard, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that that's my wife. And for an anniversary, I got a lot of points by naming the vineyard after her. So it's the gift that keeps giving. But
I was going to say that's an anniversary present that lasts a lifetime.
Hopefully, yeah. And this is a cool area. So it's a cool climate Merlot. So it's going to be a little bit different than Steve's, which is in a warmer area than where we're at, despite the fact it's a cooler area of Paso Robles. So it's red fruit. It's going to be higher tones. It's going to be fairly aromatic in terms of how we make the wine. We're
Can I just
minimalist.
stop you for a second? You said
Sure.
higher tones.
Yeah, high tone fruit.
So what does that mean? I see that in tasting notes, but I never really knew what that meant.
For me, it means high aromatic and tones that you get with a bright fruit, and not overly ripe fruit. Fruit with the lower pH, if you would be my description.
Great.
And we're of course using oak. We use we use puncheons instead of barrels for this. And it's staying in oak, of which maybe only 40% is new oak for about 18 months. And the winemaking, as I mentioned, is minimalist because we like to let the grape speak for itself. And so we're not adding yeast, we're not adding malolactic. We're using the natural flora and fauna for that. That's in the vineyard, and we get a fairly medium body, I would say, and it just has a lot of very easy to drink 3 to 4 years after harvest. And yet we're finding that our older Merlots are aging fairly well, which has been a big surprise for that region. So, yeah.
Actually, that's a great jumping off point. But let's stay on you for a second because I have a few other questions. But I'll pose this to you, but then also all of the panelists. How ageable is fine Merlot? So a good bottle of Merlot, how long will it improve for or stay interesting for?
We started making Merlot back in 1999, and I've been pleased with how those wines have aged. However, I do think that they age better and longer at lower alcohols. So, and I think the French have really kind of figured this out too. And so the pendulum of picking at very ripe alcohol, at 26, 27, I think, at least for us, is shifting back towards 24, 25, a little lower alcohol, maybe not quite as much extraction, but instead of the dark fruit, we're getting a more red fruit, especially again in the cooler area that we're growing Merlot in.
Does anyone else want to opine on the ageability of Merlot? Good Merlot? Or am I hope I'm not too muted, or does anyone else have an opinion on aging Merlot?
Yes, Mark, I would like to say something.
Yes, thank you, Ivo.
Yeah. I believe Merlot, well-made Merlot can age gracefully, but as a winemaker, you have to make choice. Do you want to create very sexy, supple Merlot by over-ripening it? Steve already touched upon alcohol. Also, you have to add those overripe grapes have high pH. They have already developed tannins. You don't have to do much at the winery. And that's very popular style. Many consumers love it, but it cannot age well. And so you have to commit. Do you want something that will please people immediately and won't age? Or, of course, if you release our Merlot after 3.5 years, it has to be ready to be enjoyed at night. But also, if somebody wants to keep it for 10, 20 years, enjoy it. Not everybody likes 20-year-old Merlot, but I personally love older Cabernets and Merlots. So Merlot, of course, capacity to age it as long as you choose to put enough structure in it.
Steve, I'm getting some very pleasant tannins on the finish of this. Is that you think helping those tannins, as soft as they are or as velvety as they are, they're still present? So is that a vehicle for this wine improving with age?
Sure. I like to call them juicy tannins. They get your juices going. And I think that, for me, it's all about oxygen management. And as Randall Graham once said, and I'll paraphrase, that oxygen management is like surfing. If you get out in front of the wave, you'll wipe out, and that would mean you've oxygenated the wine, and you end up with sherry, and it doesn't age very well. And then if you are reduced, the other side of the pendulum, that would be you don't catch the wave at all. So it's being out there on the wave, maneuvering just enough, and I think oxygen is the key to one of the keys to ageability in wine, and what I like to call the reductive strength of the wine is what you're referring to. The phenolics that polymerize and age to become softer, more supple, and for some much more enjoyable. My wife won't drink a Merlot that's less than 10 years of age. It's wow. Too much for her. She's a Pinot hound. So
I love it. She won't even drink her own within 10 years of age,
That's right. She likes the softer tannins.
I don't blame her. And that's one of, I got this now in both of these beautiful wines. It's that velvety texture that, again, I think it's so likable that certain critics, it's not edgy enough for them. And by the way, most great wine critics love fine Merlot like this. I mean, for people who don't know the Sideways story, Sideways, of course, Miles dissed Sideways. If anyone orders Merlot, I'm effing leaving. And then that basically canceled. It was an early example of an unfair cancellation where it canceled Merlot. I think it went from 20% of red wine grapes in California, and winemakers pulled out a lot of the Merlot, and it went down to 13, and I don't even know where it is now. But the point is, I think it got rid of a lot of the imposters and a lot of the people who were doing it in the wrong place. Would that be right? Panel?
Yeah, I think that's very fair, and you're right. I mean, every year I've farmed since Sideways, we've seen Merlot come out of the ground. I haven't planted a Merlot vine since the 90s.
Wow.
And that's sad to say, for obvious reasons when you drink these wines, but that's the reality.
Yeah, I mean, there are, as you all are proving, there are just these beautiful Merlots from California. And then, of course, the other famous region is Bordeaux, especially on the right bank. And, Petrus, as the English say, which is mostly, if not all, Merlot. And then you've got these great super Tuscans, Maceto, from Italy. And I mean, so it whether it's a blending component, maybe to tone down Cabernet or a standalone, it is such sensual wine. I think only a curmudgeon wouldn't love these sorts of kind of medium or full bodied red fruited or black cherry, and that mint quality we were talking about, or eucalyptus. I mean, it's really really pretty. So I'm glad that the people who are left are the true Merlot specialists, or at least most of them are.
Yeah.
Well, great. Let's jump over to Ivo and Grgich Hills. Ivo, I have to ask, your uncle, one of the most iconic winemakers, and the look with the beret is really, really cool. Do you wear a beret? Were you ever inspired to wear your own beret, or is that purely is it Mike?
It's purely Mike. I don't wear any hats. No berets, no hats.
Okay. Well, you don't need a beret. When you taste this wine, beret or not, it's made in just a beautiful way. So tell us a little bit about this and about Grgich Hills.
Thank you again, Mark, for having us. So we are family owned and operated business. Mike is turning 100, but he has one daughter, Violet, and I'm here. So We are in charge of running business. Hills, Austin Hills, you mentioned, they are partners. Partnership is still very strong, which we are grateful. I have 6 kids, 2 already joined, so at least we have 3 generations, and we love what we do. This is truly passion. Business is secondary, and we feel privileged to be able to grow grapes and make wine. In Croatia, we have generations of winemakers in our family. So our strongest point is that we are a state. My uncle understood the importance of growing grapes by himself, and through purchasing either empty land or vineyards. By 2003, we became a state. So since 2003, everything that we make is from our own grapes. We have 5 vineyards in Napa Valley, from Carneros, American Canyon, Carneros all the way to Calistoga. So our Merlot, we call it cool climate Merlot. 80% of our Merlot is grown in American Canyon and Carneros region. Very few people know American Canyon, but it's very good region for Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, and Merlot. So 80% Merlot is in the south, and then 20% is in Yountville. Interesting story about Yountville. We have very distinguished, already mentioned person in Christian Muix, who is owner of Dominus. And we have many discussions about Merlot in Napa. He believes Napa is not good for Merlot. He believes Napa should be all Cabernet. And so, needless to say, he tried to grow Merlot. We are neighbors in Yountville for many years. And finally, 3 years ago, he gave up. He pulled the last 5 acres of Merlot next to us in Yountville and planted Cabernet. So again, he believes that even Yountville is too warm for Merlot. And he said one time, he said, I wish my property is 15 miles south, there will be better Merlot. And I say, yes, that's where we are. But also we have 5 acres of Merlot in Yountville, but our Merlot is grown on pure clay, and we occasionally water a tiny bit. And I think Merlot tends to really goes into stress. So you have to be careful with Merlot. Cabernet can handle stress better.
Interesting.
So once you taste our Merlot, not everybody likes this style. It's a bit more structured, tends to be reduced. So this is 2019 vintage, won't be released in another 6 months. I agree with Steve. Merlot ages beautifully. I would prefer my Merlot to be 10-year-old.
Interesting.
We do back to vineyards. The secret of our success is, besides vineyards, our farming. We never believed in chemicals. We've been certified organic for over 20 years, biodynamic. And then 3 years ago, I discovered regenerative farming, which is my organic and biodynamic farming improved our soil dramatically. There was still unanswered questions with viruses, mealybugs, nutrition, lack of water, drought, and stuff like that. And I believe regenerative farming is an incredible way to farm and beat all these adversities. We had 2020 vintage, different vintage in Napa with smoke taint. We made beautiful wines, red wines. Not a single cluster was left out hanging. Now, 2022, very incredibly difficult vintage due to drought and then intense heat. Many of our neighbors, they classified grapes. They was pure raisin, no such thing here. So,
yeah,
instead of a winemaker taking all credit for great wine, I give all credit to our sheep that we have and microbes in soil. They produce truly flavors, and we are Europeans. We believe that winemaker is important. Basically, to raise wine, winemaker cannot create flavors. Doesn't matter what you do. You might put everything, all your wine in French or American brand new oak and trick some people with those flavors, but that's about it. All other flavors are in grapes. So that's our how we see grape growing, and in winemaking we take it as also just like Steve. We have plenty native yeasts on the grapes, hundreds of thousands probably, different strains of Saccharomyces. And all we have to do, crush grapes. And also it's interesting, by what temperature you bring your grapes in, you can select what kind of yeast you have. So if You start with 55 degrees, it will take you 5, 6, 7 days to start, and there is more apiculate yeast. If you start with 65 to 70 degrees, fermentation starts second day, and you have mostly Saccharomyces. So it's interesting how you can play with that.
Will you pick at night purposefully for that cooler yeast?
Some depends. I don't believe it's really in long soaking. People pick Cabernet Merlot at night and then chill it, and then they have to warm it. And since we do wild yeast, we don't go extremes. I cannot afford to bring grapes at 50 or 48 degrees.
I see.
So if sometimes if you have to be practical, sometimes it's a cool morning and grapes come at 55. So I let them sit for 5 days, and then it's kind of some kind of cold soak. So the rest, so simple winemaking, maximum 2 weeks on skins, temperature maybe maximum 81 degrees. In old days, we were going to 90, 95 degrees, 7 weeks on skins, crazy things. So we are back to normal winemaking with only 2 weeks of skin contact, lower temperature. And the idea here is to create more balanced and elegant wine. So we are in favor of lower alcohol because high alcohol obscures precision. We want in some crude kind of comparison, like if you like football, you have these linemen, huge guys, 350 pounds, incredibly strong, but they have fat. They need to be heavy. Then you have wide receiver, chiseled body. And I prefer wide receiver's body than lineman's body. And so in winemaking, we try to have that kind of precision in winemaking to see details over. So we prefer detail over power. At the end, the result is authentic wine. We want to create authentic wine. And this one starts a bit reduced. Steve mentioned that, oxygen and stuff like that. But that reduction is sign of health. That will carry this wine through 20, 30, 50 years of age. Because of cool climate, we have structure that is a bit different from North Napa. That is, so it's not as supple as many Merlots in Napa Valley. And as I said, not everybody is a big fan, but we do have people that really like it. And I believe that if you put it in a tasting in Cabernet, it could be as a ringer. Some people will think this might be Cabernet.
So can we unpack that a little bit? Because first of all, this smells different. Each one has its own individuality. However, this has a pungency, a really pleasant pungency. I get like rhubarb, where it's like some of the others were like black cherry, and then I get a minerally quality to it, and maybe a little bit of licorice, but this is very different. How do you account for that, and what do you get from it?
It's overwhelmingly cool climate. It's Carneros in American Canyon. It's not it's nothing to do with any kind of technique. This is what's supposed to be terroir, where you grow your grapes, so I get even like a tarry mineral. Yeah. It's a graphite here, and there's earthy, definitely black licorice that comes, and almost hints of green. And Steve mentioned herbaceousness. In old days of Tyrone Parker, if you got caught with hints of parasites, that's 70 points. So people got so scared of any greenness.
Yeah, I totally get that, and it's really pleasant. Just a little bit of sage, that kind of herbal quality that's fascinating and really lovely.
Once again, this is different than most Merlots, and everybody has beautiful wine. All these wines are incredible tonight. They really are. They're all different. So that's. We need to enjoy and celebrate that they are different, not that everybody is making same wines.
Well put. Okay. We're going to go to our fourth one, and then we're going to have lots of, I think there are questions, but then I also have questions. Actually, why don't we, one question, Gwen, well, actually, let's see. Amanda, can you explain how the clay type soil, when holding into water due to its density, can have a less desired effect on the output? So kind of a quite viticultural question, but can you explain how the clay type soil, when holding on to the water due to its density, can have a less desired effect on the output? So anyone want to take that?
I'll take a stab at it. It depends upon how much clay there is, really. You know, in a soil, ideal growing conditions, you want 50% oxygen and 50% water when they come to when they're full. And if you got a heavy clay, you may have too much water holding capacity, and that impacts the vine negatively in terms of its growth. And so it's going to be more compact and it won't have as much vigor and capacity as a vine that's growing in a nice loam, which is a good mix of clay and sand. And then on the other hand, you know, you could have a soil without much clay at all, and then you don't have much water holding capacity. And in that case, the vine, especially Merlot on its own roots, would be more subject to water stress, especially during a drought or during an extreme heat event.
Thank you. Okay, well, that was the most thorough answer possible on that question. So thanks.
Politically correct.
That's awesome. Okay, number 4, St. Supery. And we have the Rutherford. So this is the 2018 Merlot. Michael, tell us about this one and also St. Supery.
Absolutely. But certainly. Thank you for having us again, Mark, and thanks for being part of this outstanding group of people and winemakers. So, listen, St. Supery, if any of you have ever visited, we are sort of based pretty much in the center of the valley, not far from Evo, but quite away from Evo's Merlot vineyards, when in relation to Napa Valley. So we're in Rutherford, and we have 2 vineyards, and we are an estate brand. And so all of our wines come from one or a combination of our 2 vineyards. And our Merlot particularly is from our Rutherford estate. And so it's a great, we believe it's a great location to grow Merlot. Rutherford is a unique location. Wines tend to be all about place. And this is certainly the case with Rutherford. And I think Evo has illustrated some really good points on the fact that he is also making Merlot in Napa, yet his location is dramatically different from where we are. So our wines, even though as the crow flies, I guess we're not that far apart, we are in dramatically different growing scenarios, which is interesting. So, you know, a little bit about St. Supery. We are, as I said, an estate brand. We own our own vineyards. All of our wines come from our properties. We are certified Napa Green, so we farm all of our properties sustainably in the best fashion that we can, and we are always trying to enhance that as we move forward. Our Rutherford location consists of alluvial soils, and in the front of it we have a bale loam, and in the middle of it we have a bale clay loam, and in the back of it we have a J.Lohrs loam, all alluvial, and as you get closer towards the Napa River, probably some sort of fluvial soils. So where you have the bale loam, which is the front of the property, we have very fast draining soils, and they have some gravel through them because they are on an old riverbed. As we head to the mid part of our property, we have less of that stone through the soil, and a little more clay. So we've talked a lot about clay today, and I think it's quite interesting. You know, people when winemakers talk about Merlot, the word clay often comes up. And I think the reality is that Merlot grows well with some sort of consistency of clay in a soil.
Mm.
But on our property, even though our different parcels on the property of Merlot are not that far apart, they are a little different because one's in just a straight loam that drains quickly. One's in a clay loam that's it's got pretty good drainage, but it's a little tighter, holds water a little bit more. And the wines that come from each of those do vary a little. The front, we get more of a opulence, more brightness, more bright tannic structure, and what have you. As we go towards the back, where you start to see a little more clay in the soil, we get more plummy tones. Depending on where our ripeness lands, we might have a hint of herbal, although we see less of that in our wine. However, I think it is a nature of Merlot to want to do that, which is fine. It's part of what the grape is. And so I have the good fortune of being able to use these little parcels within our Rutherford estate and sort of I try to capture the strengths of what each parcel can do. Now, Rutherford is a fairly warm location, quite renowned for Cabernet, quite renowned for the Cabernet texture, and the all famous Rutherford dust, which
yes,
is
I was going
seen.
to ask you. Excellent.
Yeah.
Go on.
And which is seen by different people as different things. Some people see it as an aromatic thing, some as a flavor thing. I personally see it as a textural thing, and the fact that in our Cabernets we feel the tannin, but it's a very fine-grained tannin with tremendous finesse. And to be quite frank, I think we see that a little of that element come through in our Merlot as well from this location, particularly on the more loamy soil for sure. So we have the opportunity to have these different parcels. They perform a little differently to each other just because of the soil variation, and then we bring it into the cellar. And so I like all the. Excuse me one second. I, like all the other guys on the panel here today, agree that our wines are about place. Place defines what we will eventually put in the bottle, not the winemaker so much. Well, the winemaker has a role to shepherd the wine along. So we can talk a little bit about the winemaking perhaps and what we do. And that is we do generally harvest at night, and we are actually looking for cooler receival at the cellar. And we look for that because we actually put our fruit on skins for a cold soak, but we don't chill it because it comes in cold, and we allow it to warm up naturally and initiate fermentation and what have you. Of course, when it's received to our fermenter, we've already done a sorting of the fruit, so all of our fruit is double and sometimes triple sorted across our sorting system.
Wow.
So, and received to fermenters, and we have a few different techniques to our fermentation approach. So we have some small stainless steel fermenters, which tend to present more of a fruit-driven wine, more opulent fruit, more cherry, more a little bit of plum perhaps. And then we have some concrete fermenters, which do bring about some mineral qualities. Small oak vats, which bring a little more. They tend to be quite structured, and we do with our Merlot a reasonable amount of barrel fermentation, and we have a couple of techniques there. But most significantly, we actually take sorted berries, and we take the head out of the barrel, and we load it up with the sorted Merlot fruit, put the head back in, and put it on a rolling rack, and spin the barrel to macerate, and it becomes a very long extended fermentation. So we have to be patient with it, but we get some really interesting results of the wine that allows us to build a Merlot that has a little more that's very well structured, but yet quite graceful in its structure, and enhances and accentuates that really fine Rutherford grain, that fine Rutherford sort of dust texture that we talk about. So a few different techniques there, and then as we go through those fermentation techniques, we will then, of course, go to barrel, and our typical time in barrel is about 18 or 19 months. And we use this blend is all French oak, and And at the end of it, we then can use those different fermentation components, and those parcel components, to complete a blend. And we're looking for in our Merlot, obviously we're looking for a wine that presents place, and that's our place, which is, as I say, rather a bit of a warm location, so we're getting brighter, sort of reasonably ripe fruit. But all of those fermenters, that fruit derived from the stainless fermenter, that more mineral derived from concrete, and the more terroir driven approach from the oak, and that, quite interesting, allows us to build a blend that has all these complexities coming together, which makes a very interesting wine. And our goal at that point is to create a wine that is scented and textured with good density, but somewhat seamless at the same moment. And we're trying to present a wine that can be consumed within 4 or 5, that people can enjoy at 4 or 5 years of age. But we also want a wine that has ageability, and we believe we're
Feels
achieving
like that here. That the pleasant tannins. I get maybe the most tannins on this wine, but really nice tannins. In other words, it's drinkable now. But I feel like this could probably improve 15, 20 years.
Yeah, well, that's certainly we've seen that in our wines, in our Merlots. So so we certainly believe they're very age-worthy wines. I like what I see when the wines are hitting 8, 9, 10, 12 years of age. And yes, they certainly can go beyond that for sure.
Fantastic. And just give us a few descriptors. I think sometimes asking a winemaker to describe their wine in like wine speak is a little bit like asking an artist to talk about their art, and no artist wants to. They want you to have your own impression of it. But if you could throw a few adjectives our way, how would you describe this?
So generally, I mean, look, our vineyard here is not a huge vineyard here in Rutherford. So, and we're coming from the same parcels year by year, so it's quite consistent year by year. But generally, what we're seeing, and I think this wine presents that, is that sort of that plum, that black cherry, a hint of red fruit, and a little bit of maybe a very subtle hint of graphite, a little sort of cocoa, and there's a little vanillin thread from the oak, I guess. And this wine, I'm sorry, a little over 40% has been in new barrels on this wine.
I was going to ask. Okay,
so it's going to present a little oak on that wine.
Yeah, I get a bit of a mocha or coffee thing too, and it's just gorgeous, and it's like a kaleidoscope. It keeps changing every time it really has that complexity to it. So I mean, that's what we're doing. I mean, I think the whole conversation about loam and clay and what have you is a very interesting conversation. I don't know that I've worked it all out, but certainly it's interesting to see the wines come from there, and it's interesting to see that Merlot can perform well on soils that have higher clay content, yet maybe Cabernet doesn't do quite as well all the time in that same location, which is interesting. And in fact, when we look at our vineyard here and our property, we've located all of those lesser clay locations and the higher clay locations, and sorted out our varietal mix to match that somewhat. That's really cool. And for those of you who are casual drinkers out there, you want to sound really erudite in a tasting room. Let's say one of these gentlemen walk through. You could either say, if the winery is based or if the vineyard's based in Rutherford, say, I detect a little Rutherford dust here, which I guess is textural. Or just say, instead of minerally, say, I get a bit of a loamy quality to it. And for forever I didn't know what loam meant, and now I think I'm understanding from tonight. So just kind of that mineral but loam as a geological definition, I guess. Someone previously said it's clay mixed with something else. Is that right?
And yeah,
okay.
Sand, silt, and clay.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah. So if you have a clay loam, you probably have a loam that's a little heavier in the clay content.
Very good to know. Okay, let's switch gears because now we're going to get some real color, some interesting answers, I think. Not that it hasn't been interesting up to now, but now we're going to really shift into gear. And I'm going to go around. So we're going to go Steve, Ivo, and Michael. So start with Steve Peck, and we'll do the power round. So number one, what is a bottle or the bottle that hooked you on wine? And tell me when it was. You don't have to go into great detail, but go for it, Steve.
Yeah, Mark, I got started young. There used to be this monastery up in Los Gatos, and there was monks there making wine in a place called the Novitiate. And my uncle in Santa Cruz, my dad, they'd head up to the Novitiate and they'd pick up the black muscat. So, so this would have been in the probably mid 70s. I was 10, 12 years old and remembering getting my first sips of that. And that was really before the industry switched from sweet wines, which were kind of the norm in those days, to the dry wines that kind of emerged really in the 80s, I would say, or kind of got started in the 70s. But yeah, put me down for a little black muscat from the Novitiate.
How cool is that? All right, awesome. Thank you, Steve McIntyre.
Yeah, I would say it would have been a Riesling in a class at Fresno State Wine Appreciation. That probably did it for me. Although, truth be told, others that know me will tell you it was Lancer's Rosé in a paper bag, but I did get hooked.
Wine is all contextual, so I'm not surprised. Thank you, Ivo. What hooked you?
My development was a bit different. In Croatia, we all make wine. My father did. I had to help him, and it was 50% vinegar, 50% wine. So I started with a very low bar. Then coming here in Napa in '86, my uncle introduced me, obviously, through Grgich and other wines to far better wines. So for me, it was evolution, starting very low and then getting high. So I could not pick one wine that changed everything, but rather it was slow evolution.
Can I ask, just on the topic of Croatian wines, do you have a producer? By the way, my friends who've been to Croatia say it's wonderful to visit. And I've had wines from there, and I can't remember the producers. Do you have a preferred producer or?
No, there's beauty about Croatian wines is there's at least 20 different varieties you never heard of, and they're all grown in small different villages, and you go and sample them, and darn, they always taste better there than you bring them here. So again, I'm not a single producer, but lots of interesting wines.
Right, so everyone should explore. Thank you. Michael, what hooked you?
Oh, you know what? I grew up on an old family vineyard, so I was sort of stuck into this anyway. But and my dad was incredibly good friends. In fact, best friends with a winemaker called Peter Lehman. And so I spent a lot of time around Peter Lehman. But
wow,
even before he built his winery, and actually lived on our farm while he built his winery. And prior to that, he worked for a company called Saltram. And my father used to sell out grapes to Peter Lehman at Saltram. And I remember before he'd drive the truck laden with grapes to the Saltram estate. Before I could see over the dashboard, I'd sit in the truck with him. And when they got there in those days, the grape growers would typically hang out with Peter Lehman himself in the weighbridge, and he'd have German sausage, because it's a German community in the Barossa, of course. So you have German sausage hanging from the rafters, and everyone would take a slice of German sausage and a glass of wine or port, and they're quite renowned for port. And I was too young to drink, of course, and I shouldn't have been. But I do remember having a little port, and that sort of got me interested in what was happening, along with a bunch of other options. And I'm sure, I don't know that the grape growers should have been actually drinking port while they're delivering grapes, but that was a long time ago.
That's really cool. And did you have sausage with that port too, or was it just straight on port?
In the Barossa, they have a sausage that's a very famous German sausage. They call it Metwurst.
Yum. All right. Well, excellent. Next question. What is, and I think Steve addressed this with the surf wax, but so excuse me if I'm stealing your sensation, but what is the one of the most unusual aromas you've smelled in a good Merlot? So let's start with Steve Peck.
Yeah, that fresh oak surf wax character again. That's more part of the elaboration from from the barrels and stuff. But I think another term I probably already used already would, again is maybe juniper berry or conifer. I think
Conifer.
there's some
God, I
positive
love that.
themes. And one of you, I think it was Evo mentioned the kind of the Robert Parker effect. And if a single word showed up that was in this family of the basis green, let alone pyrazine vegetal, your score was just down. It was trash. And I can remember working at Joseph Phelps in the 80s. I went back to Spectator and looked up the scores from 1985. And they got like a 91 points on the Napa Valley Cab that year. And the critic wrote, wonderfully minty Cabernet Sauvignon. If the word minty showed up in your review today, you would get no 90 plus points. It kind of became a very negative thing. And I hope that we talked about pendulum swinging from high alcohol styles to more freshness, more ageability. I do think that we need to kind of push back a little bit and remind ourselves that those varietal characters are the best. That they're what define the wine.
And I see that in all four of these wines tonight. Thank you, Steve McIntyre. Unusual but good aroma in a Merlot.
Yeah, I think nutmeg would be something that I have smelled in some Merlot that I think is pleasant to a point. So that'd be my pleasant aroma.
Excellent. Evo.
I am a big fan of minerality, which can be found easier in white wine. And for me, minerality is a sign of great viticulture. Sometimes you find minerality through graphite. For me,
Yes.
Minerality red wine is graphite. So for me, it's very attractive contribute, and it's rarely found, I think, in California.
I love that. Would you say graphite's more of a red wine descriptor in terms of minerality than
Yeah, I would. Yes.
Okay, that's you just taught me that. I'd love to know that. Thank you. Michael, unusual aroma.
Yeah, listen, I'm always intrigued by the fact we find anise in Merlot a lot and graphite. It's not unusual per se, but I'm always intrigued by those aromatics and what have you, and I like them. I think they're super interesting. I think Merlot tends to present that from time to time, which is good. Unusual. A word, when I was a young winemaker, a word that I'd hear about often, and I see it, and I don't use it anymore, but occasionally see it still, is gunpowder. Occasionally, I'd see a note of gunpowder, and it was more often a description when I was a very, very young winemaker, or maybe pre-winemaking, that I'd hear other people talk about. And occasionally I see it in a wine today, in just a background hint, and I always find that interesting, but it's unusual.
I've heard Alec Baldwin describe his wine that way. Sorry, too soon.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No.
too soon. No, but Chablis to me has that gunpowdery, and is that sometimes, you guys are the experts, but is that sometimes a sign of reductive winemaking, like that match or gunpowdery?
You cannot have minerality without good acidity. So it's combination. It's a combination of that. For me, best description was when I was a kid, I was crazy enough. I would like to lick battery to get a little shock. So basically, it's almost a little jolt of battery is like, for me, minerality is.
Wow, a little ever ready for you. Okay, so we're gonna go back to Steve Peck. What is your favorite or a favorite wine, not your own, but under $20, 20 or less? What's a great, extremely affordable bottle?
This is a great question for me because I'm so frugal.
Yeah.
Last time I went to the Northern Rhone, I was like, oh, I love those Côte Rôties, but they're pretty pricey. I love that Hermitage, but
Right.
I discovered Saint Pere, which had a tradition of sparkling wine, and it's Marsan Roussan, and it's an emerging area again, emerging. Not that there's new plantings in Saint Pere, but it's emerging in that I think that the enthusiasm for their sparkling wine products is kind of softened over the years, and so the young generations of family winemakers are producing the Marsan and Roussan more as still table wines, and the wines just really deliver.
And this is from the Northern Rhone?
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
Right
I've never had Saint-Péré. Wow, that's very interesting.
Cote Rôtie, Condrieu's right there. Yeah.
Fantastic. Steve McIntyre.
Yeah, I'm going to have to be politically correct because we sell grapes to 60 different wineries.
Yeah.
But for me, I would say the Got Sauvignon Blanc, just really a great Sauvignon Blanc for under $20, well under $20. Other than that, the one time I was in Italy, just got off of the plane with my wife, and we went into a pizza restaurant, and there was a craft of wine that they brought to the table. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, wine and a craft, that can't be good, but it was great. And it wasn't that expensive. And, that's one of those experiences you remember, it's just emotional.
You don't even know what type of wine it was.
No, well, I'm sure it was a Chianti. It was definitely.
Okay. Vino Sfuso, I think that kind of craft wine. Terrific. Okay. Who are we on next? Evo.
Yeah, I love Sauvignon Blanc. So I pick my compatriot Babbage, New Zealand Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. I think you can have it for $14 or $15. Very good Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. Babbage.
Very, very reliable. I love it. And Michael.
So I don't know if it's still under $20 a bottle or not, but I grew up with Peter Lemon, as I told you before, and that brand still makes a wine called Clancy's. It's a blend. I think it's got Shiraz, Cabernet, Merlot, and maybe even some Franc in it. But listen, I thought it was always a pretty good wine, and good wine for the valley, good wine for the price. So that will be my short answer to that one.
When I was in Australia a couple months ago, I went to the Bottle-O, several Bottle-Os, and they were great, affordably priced Peter Lehman wines there. So I'm not surprised. Okay, second to last question. What is something about Merlot that more people should know about? Steve Peck.
When Carol Meredith from UC Davis started doing all the DNA testing out in the vineyards and and trying to figure out the true parents of these various varieties, there was a good 10 years where Merlot was a kind of a single parent variety. So it's kind of like a funny fact. It didn't take them long to figure out that Cabernet Franc was one of the parents, which would make Cabernet Sauvignon a sibling, let's say, or Malbec a sibling. But it took them over 10 years to figure out who the other parent was. And it was just some crazy, obscure variety that they found in Brittany somewhere. And I wouldn't even know how to pronounce it. I mean, check Wikipedia or something like that. But there was this period of time where Merlot kind of didn't quite know who mom and dad were. So.
Excellent. Okay. Next.
Yeah, I would say that the fact that Merlot is still the most widely planted variety in Bordeaux is something that people ought to be aware of, given the demise of Merlot in this country.
Speaking of that demise, so I'm looking at the questions, and Kathleen asked, is the American demand for Merlot increasing? Now, again, we all know the meltdown happened, the demise, but where is it right now? Is it still that stigma that people don't want to plant it, or I mean, I feel like among the like wine critics I hang out with, we are drinking it more, but maybe you guys know what the numbers are.
Well, I would just say that we don't make a ton of Merlot, but you're right. People who are discerning and are really into wine, us cork dorks, if you would, we're definitely drinking more Merlot. But I'm concerned that the public, you know, the especially the public segment that's not real into discovery is just not quite there yet. But they will.
They will. Well, with enough of these engaging virtual tastings, we're doing it. All right. Well, thank you. Ivo.
Yeah, I would like people to know that Merlot is incredibly noble variety. And then also it's a great value. When you see how much people charge for Napa Valley Cabernet versus Merlot, I think you get excellent value for your dollars. Also, I'd like to say a bit about demise Merlot. You already mentioned that, or Steve, that lots of bad vineyards were pulled out. They shouldn't be in first place. When there's popularity, everybody wants to cash in. And same unfortunate thing is happening to Pinot now. Pinot is planted everywhere, overcropped. Pinot cannot be overcropped for good quality. And then people start blending it with all other red varieties with good color, bastardizing, ruining Pinot. So same thing will happen to Pinot as soon, I believe, as Merlot. Quality always rules. There will always be top quality Merlots and Pinots that will survive and thrive. We do see that many sommeliers are going back to Merlots, and for two reasons that I already stated: incredible noble variety and good price.
Yeah, the good price aspect was really an important point. When I'm in a steakhouse, you know, I get a very similar flavor profile at a fraction of the price with Merlot versus Cabernet Sauvignon. Michael.
The unknown. So, something that people should know. You know, at the end of that Sideways movie, Miles, you know, fast food restaurant, they had what do you have a bottle of? Cheval Blanc?
Right.
So it's drinking a fair bit of Merlot, I'd say. I think that should be known.
And do you think they planned it that way, or do you think that was just a mistake on their part?
I would assume it was a joke on the director's part, that meant to be part of the entertainment for those that would recognize it.
Right.
But I don't know.
We'll have to ask. I can email Alexander Payne, and we can see. But okay,
I'd be interested to know his response. Actually,
I will email, and I'll get back to you all if he responds to me. I hope I didn't alienate him with the newsletter. But all right, final question of the night. So this has been so engaging, and thank you. It's really an honor to have you all in the house here. But so what is one desert island wine? Which of your wines, any vintage, would you have on that desert island? And I guess Steve Peck, we'll start with you.
Always the privilege of going first, but you know, we make a wine called J.Lohrs Signature Cabernet Sauvignon, and it is just the full tilt expression of that house style I talked about, where the wine's is, you know, it's a Cabernet, but it's as dark as Petite Sirah, you'd think, and but still soft on that palate. So as you move up our price tiers, you know, the goal is for the wines to become dense, but still soft, supple, approachable, you know, not, you know, ageable certainly, but not reliant on age for them to kind of unwind. And I think I could do with some of the J.Lohrs Signature. You know, you can, you know, throw a few bottles, throw a case in my casket when it's my time, I guess. So
I like that.
Yeah.
Mine too. Steve McIntyre.
I think it would be our winemaker series Pinot Noirs. We recently embarked on collaborating with some old friends, winemakers that I've dealt with over the years, and The first one out of the chute was from Don von Staveren, and basically it's a McIntyre label, but we let the winemakers go in and do whatever they want. They can pick wherever they want. They can make wine in their own style, not just our style. And that's been really great because we have 4 winemakers involved in that now, and the competition and the blind tasting, and it's a wonderful tool. And so, but by having that on the desert isle, I'd have really fond memories in addition to some great wine.
That matters a lot with our vinous pleasure. Ivo, what's your desert island wine?
I would pick our Yantil Cabernet from Old Vineyard, which is now 63 years old. Ageability is probably, it can hold its own 50 years. So just in case I get stuck there for many years, something that will last. And then I was already thinking about storage. So I'll dig under the ground and to hold for years. So that one will last.
Are there certain years you've had that just blow your mind?
Then if I have to pick a year, it will be 13, which was most robust, the most tonic wine that will last 100 years easily.
Great to know. Michael, bring us home. What's your desert island wine?
I mean, in a nutshell, I've been making wine here for a long time, so I'm very sort of Bordeaux style focus in what I do every day. But I did grow up, as we've said, in the Barossa Valley, which was all about Shiraz, Grenache, Mourvedre. And the wine that's always sort of been remarkable to me is a wine called Hill of Grace. It's made by the Henschke family.
Yes.
And as I said, we're 6th generation on our property in the Barossa Valley. We are. And Henschke was 5, so very old family. But they are remarkable winemakers, and that particular vineyard is quite unique in the fact that it sits on a little low sloping hill that looks down upon the Gnadenpride Church, which is why it's called Hill of Grace, and it's just a absolutely remarkable wine.
I've seen that alongside Penfolds Grange in the airport, sold as like, Australia's best. And I've never tried it. Dinah, try it. Henschke, thank you. So, by the way, everyone will be emailed links to order any of these wines tonight. And I just want to thank you guys, Steve, Ivo, and Michael. This has been really edifying and also entertaining and totally thirst quenching. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate being part of the group.
Thank you. Yeah. And for anyone who signed up and wasn't here, we're going to blast once we edit the video, put the bumpers on, we're going to send it out to everyone. But thank you again. Go Merlot.